Hey.
All right. So you can get started whenever you're ready.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katrina Boyer. I'm the Investor Education Coordinator at the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities. And I am so excited to be talking with you today about how we can make the nest egg that we've saved through our investments last after we retire. One of the biggest questions that I've received in all my years of doing outreach and investor education is, how do I know that what I've worked so hard to save is going to last through the next 20 years or 25 years? So we really felt that this was an important presentation to bring to our constituents. So today we're going to break retirement um, budgeting, how to make that last, into two different parts. The first part is the part where we're going to talk about, this is what I have, and this is how I'm going to ensure that it lasts me through my golden years. The second part is going to really focus on three different scams that often target older adults and tries to separate them from the assets and wealth that they've built. So we'll talk about how we can protect our money that we've worked so hard for from the public or from the criminals. So we'll talk about income sources, required minimum distributions. We're going to talk about spending it wisely. We have two different sort of plans that we can take a look at. And then for the scam portion of it, we're going to talk about free lunch seminars, affinity fraud, and Ponzi schemes. So when we first start to think about retiring, or maybe we just retired, we need to stop to think about, what are our sources of income going to be? Um, Maybe you have an IRA or a form of a 401k or 403, whatever, 457. There's so many different numbers. And maybe you have Social Security. And a lot of people who are retired already may even have a pension, which is a defined amount that you'll earn from having worked at a specific company. Now, I'll tell you that it's important that we really stop to think about all the different sources of income, because I know people who have kind of forgotten that they had worked at this old place that had a pension for them. And I know one person who actually realized that he was getting like $400 more a month than he was anticipating, because it turned out that, lo and behold, he had worked for a union and he had a pension coming from these two unions that he'd worked for. So it's really important that we assess exactly what we're going to have coming in, because that goes a long way in helping us to plan how we're going to move forward. And then there are some non-traditional sources of income. Maybe we have invested in some money market or mutual funds through the years. I know sometimes we do that for a season and maybe we don't stick to it. So sometimes there are accounts maybe that we've forgotten about. Another non-traditional source of income are annuities. Now, it's important that we understand that annuities can be incredibly confusing, and it's not something, annuities are not regulated for the most part by the Department of Banking and Securities, because annuities are really considered more of an insurance product. So they would be regulated under the Department of Insurance, but you can find more information at investor.org, which is the SEC's consumer facing webpage. And then you can also get from NAIC.org. But a third type of non-traditional source of income I want to talk about are side jobs or owning your own small business. I know that there are some older adults who the thought of not having a job to go to sort of terrifies them. Or maybe they're just not quite ready to fully enjoy a a travel life for retirees. So maybe they have special talents, or they are really good at woodworking or sewing. That kind of those types of hobbies can go a long way in helping to subsidize some of those other streams of income. And they can also go a long way in helping us as older adults to stay involved in staying busy and keeping our minds and our hands in tip-top shape. So sometimes we think about part-time job at our favorite store, or like I said, taking advantage of some of those special talents or hobbies. So once you've kind of figured out what your income is going to look like, you also want to make sure that you think about the required minimum distributions. Now, those are for individual retirement accounts that you may have. They require that you withdraw a specific amount of money. It's defined based upon the balances that you have and those types of things. I am not a financial planner, but I will tell you that there is that required minimum distribution. Now, prior to 2000, you had to start pulling that money when you were 70 and a half. Now that law has changed because Americans are living longer. We changed that to a 72-year-old that you have to withdraw once you turn 72. There are two exceptions to the rule. If you're still working, and you own less than 5% of the company, I think is what that is. Or maybe you have Roth IRAs. Now, Roth IRAs are individual retirement accounts that you have already paid tax on. You invested the money after taxes were already pulled from your earnings. But I think that it's important to understand, if you do not pull your required minimum distribution, you may be responsible for up to a 50% penalty on any money that you should have pulled and didn't. So let me explain that further. If you were required by law to take $5,000 a year out from your IRA and you didn't, you could be charged a penalty of up to $2,500. That's a lot of money. And I don't want that, I don't want to ever have to pay a penalty, let alone a 50% penalty. So I would encourage you to go to the irs.gov and search for required minimum distributions to make sure that you know what you're required to do. Another good resource is to talk to your financial investment planner, your financial advisor, or your whoever you're trusting with your finances and your taxes. So maybe even a tax professional would be the right course. But just make sure that you do it. So let's talk about the fun stuff, right? We don't want to talk about penalties. Let's talk about how we can work to spend down what we've saved without running out of money at the end. The goal is that I'm going to work till I retire at 72 or 75 or however old, but I'm going to live to be in my 90s. So how am I going to make what I've saved last through that time frame? So one way that people often plan their expenses is what's called the 4% rule. Now, the 4% rule really just sort of bases what you're living off of by withdrawing 4% of your total savings in that first year. So if you've got 250,000, 500,000, whatever it is, you want to try to live on 4% of what you've saved. Now, that's not taking into consideration any Social Security, any of your other sources of income. So keep that in mind when we think about the 4% rule. Now, while the 4% rule is a great starting point, it's okay to adjust that percentage every year based on inflation, based on, how have your investments performed. If it's been a really lousy year and you haven't had much of a return on your investment, maybe you want to tailor back a little bit and pull less than that 4%. Um, so it's important with the 4% rule, if you're looking to make it last, you want to make sure that you're not spending more than your accounts are earning. Because what happens when we spend more than we earn? We run out of money, right? So keep that in mind when you start to think about that 4% rule. You can adjust every year. You just want to be careful not to over adjust yourself into a position where in 10 years you're going to not have anything left in your investment accounts, yet you've still got another 10 or 15 years of an exciting life to live, because that's the goal, right? So let's talk then about this other thought process that a lot of people like to use. And this is called the bucket strategy. I love the bucket strategy because I'm kind of this visual person, and I like the way this looks, and it makes sense to me in my head. So the bucket strategy really is a long-term solution for planning out what we're going to do. So the theory is that you're going to have these 3 buckets of money. Now, each of those buckets of money is actually going to be an account, because I don't want anybody just to keep a bucket full of money, laying around. So we want to make sure that we have that understanding that each bucket represents an account, just a different stage in this process. So our bucket number 1 is going to have what we call the current living expenses. That's where we want to keep a balance of living expenses that will get us through for the next 1 to 2 years. We want to make sure that we keep it in um, a financial institution that has the appropriate insurance, whether it's FDIC for a bank or NCUA for credit unions. And you want to make sure that the amount that's in those accounts is not over the insured threshold. For individuals, it's $250,000 per institution. If you're a married couple, it can be up to 200 or it can be up to 500,000. But remember, it's per institution, not per account. Um, but you want to make sure that you keep these in those financial institutions, because that gives you easy access in the event that something comes up that you simply can't live without. You want to be able to get to it quickly without having to pay penalties like you may have to in some of your other investment accounts. Any money that comes in from your regular streams of income. So remember, I talked about your Social Security, maybe a pension or 401k or IRA. Those monthly streams of income that you know that you can count on need to go direct deposited right into that bucket number 1, and you need to consider that as part of the balance that you're keeping in there. Just because you want to make sure, again, you want to keep yourself with liquid finances that you can get to easily for 1 to 2 years. So that medium bucket, or bucket number 2, is money that we're going to be needing soon. Now, I say soon with air quotes because that's the money that you're going to need in the next 3 to 5 years. Now, you may not want to keep that in a traditional deposit account like a checking or savings. You may want to actually look at putting it into a more conservative investment account, because that money is going to be there for 3 to 5 years. And in 3 to 5 years, you don't want to miss out on the amount of interest that you can earn or the return on those investments. And you're using your bucket number 2 to refill bucket number 1. So you're just kind of moving funds from one bucket to the other, or from one account to the other. So keeping those the money for 3 to 5 years in a more conservative investment account is going to help you to earn interest, returns on your investments, but hopefully, because it's in a more conservative account, when it's time to access those accounts, they won't be in the middle of a down market, where you may have experienced heavy losses. So make sure that you keep, again, that 3 to 5 years worth of living expenses. Now let's talk about bucket number 3. Bucket number 3 is that bucket of money. It's going to hold the majority of your investment accounts, because that's the money that you're not going to need for at least 5 years. If I'm retiring, I wish I could retire in 2020, or 2021, but whatever. But if I'm retiring and I've got, I'm planning to live for 25 years, the money in bucket number 3 is money that I'm planning to be living on for that 25-year time frame, minus the 1 to 5 years. So we can leave that in an account that can focus more on growth. But remember that with growth comes some risk, some increased risk than something that's more conservative in our 3 to 5 year plan. So it's really important that we understand that this growth bucket may be in stock or real estate. It may be mutual funds. It's up to us and our investment professionals that we work with. But what's great to keep in mind about bucket number 3 is that the money in that bucket has time to recover from any losses that it may experience, because again, you've got more than 5 years for that money to come back. So it's, a lot of people consider that a longer term, so they're willing to take more of a risk, because with risk comes higher returns, but the potential for loss is a little higher. So you have to kind of keep that balance in mind and make sure that you're comfortable with the risk associated with the investments that you're involved in. So if we take a look, if we put this bucket strategy to work, you've got your big bucket in your investment accounts. You've got your medium bucket, that 3 to 5 years, that's got some conservative investments, maybe bonds. And then you've got your living bucket. And what you're doing is you're pulling funds every year, and you're just kind of rearranging from one bucket into the next, so that you're consistently moving that money and protecting it from big losses by moving it into the smaller account, into the smaller buckets. But it's a great way to really visualize and see exactly how your money is working. I just really think that the bucket strategy gives us that visual understanding of sort of that big picture. So that is the bucket strategy. So I always like to give some homework. We can actually see the impact. Remember, we talked about the 4% rule, the different spend down rates. So that 4% rule is considered a spend down rate. And you can actually see what happens with your investments with different rates. So maybe you want to explore 4% versus 6%. You can actually go to this website, AIER.org, and they have a calculator that will allow you to kind of play around and experiment with different spend down rates so that you're comfortable with what your decisions are going to be. Now, the other thing that I always think is so important to mention is that anytime you start to withdraw retirement funds, you need to understand the impact that the taxes are going to have on that. Every state has a different tax law when it comes to retirees. So it's important that you understand and you get that guidance from your tax professional, or you can go to irs.gov and you can find oodles of information just by searching retirement tax. So I always encourage individuals to check that out at irs.gov. Now, this is not all that there is to do. It's important that as you start to age and you start to move into this retirement process, it's important that you have a strong team of professionals that you trust. And we're going to talk about affinity fraud, but it's one thing to trust our neighbor to borrow something from us. It's an entirely different ballgame when we start to talk about our finances and having people that we trust. It's great to trust them, but it's really important that we research them and make sure that they're legitimate. So we need to understand that we want to have a financial advisor or a counselor who can help us to figure out what that plan is going to look like. So they can or may not, they may or may not be a fiduciary. A fiduciary is someone who is required by law to do what is right for your for your financial best interest. So it's important that you know whether or not your financial advisor is required to be a fiduciary. And they're going to help you to protect the assets that you've saved. An attorney can be phenomenal in helping you with estate planning. They can help you with, your last will and those types of things, and they can help you with, providing for your loved ones and that with the best inheritance with the least amount of taxes. An attorney is great for those types of things. But again, we have to understand whether or not that person is a fiduciary or not. So understanding that doctors, attorneys, and certified public accountants are always fiduciaries. They are always required to be concerned about your financial and your general well-being. Your insurance professional and your financial services person, whether they're an investment advisor, whether they are a registered broker dealer, or some other title that they may have, those individuals may or may not be a fiduciary. But it's okay to ask if they are a fiduciary, and understand that they are required by law to answer that question truthfully. So, just be honest and blunt with the person that you're considering and ask them, are you a fiduciary? And they'll have to tell you. I believe they actually have to give, at least for financial services, they have to give you that information in writing. So we wouldn't go to a medical doctor without knowing that they were licensed. It's important that we investigate our financial professional and make sure that they are properly registered. The Department of Banking and Securities in Pennsylvania registers over 200,000 investment professionals that do business in the Commonwealth. That's a lot of people. You can actually go directly to brokercheck.finra.org, and you can type in the name of the person that you're considering working with. And if you know the city or state or zip code that they're in, that's great. You can put that information in. When you hit that search button, it's going to give you, first, it's going to bring up the list of everybody who's licensed or registered within those parameters that is registered. So you find your person, you take a look, and you can find out if they're registered to do what they claim they're doing. You can see which series tests they've passed. It actually gives you a really long work history. It will even provide you with history that's not necessarily related to the finance industry. I thought that was very cool because, knowing that your professional has only ever had these 2 or 3 jobs and they've been there for a really long time shows some longevity. And then you can also see if complaints have been filed in your state or in other states, as well as other actions. So sometimes federal and state agencies have to take an action against an investment professional who has maybe not followed the rules the way they're supposed to. It's important that when you're looking at that you really take a look at what the allegations were and what action was taken. You know, maybe sometimes it's a slap on the wrist, sometimes it's a strong action, and you need to understand. It's kind of like pulling a driving report. You know, you need to understand and feel comfortable with your professional's record. That goes a really long way in giving us that peace of mind that we can trust those individuals. Or maybe it will throw us the other way that says, maybe I want to find a new professional. So it's important that we check those things out pretty regularly. Just like you can investigate investment professionals and medical professionals, you actually want to check out your attorney. You can contact the County Bar Association to get information if you're looking for a referral to an attorney. The County Bar Association can be a great resource. They actually are able to give you information about specific attorneys, or they can give you referrals. The prior FINRA isn't able to provide you with a referral, and state agencies, state regulators are not able to refer clients, you know, to a specific investment professional, but the bar associations can. So contact your county bar association, and if you can't locate that person, if you can't locate your county, you can always go to pabar.org, and they'll have that information for you to reach out to your county. Once you've done that, you can actually go to padisciplinaryboard.org, and you can actually find out if your attorney has had actions taken against them. Again, that can be a really important thing to know when we're looking at hiring you know, a professional, an attorney to represent us and steer us in the right direction as we start to plan for you know, our next steps. So you can also find information about your investment professionals. The Pennsylvania Department of Insurance can be found at insurance.pa.gov. You can verify, just like you can verify a professional through the Department of Banking and Securities or through BrokerCheck, you can verify the person that you're working with is licensed and registered. You can make sure that the insurance company that you're working with is also licensed and registered. And you can check about those annuities. You know, make sure the person, if you're considering an annuity, make sure that the person that's trying to sell you the annuity is registered with the insurance department. Again, you don't want to trust your hard-earned money to someone who isn't properly registered or licensed. So we've talked about how to make that money last. We've talked about, you know, the 4% rule, the bucket strategy, and how to hire professionals who are going to help you to make sure that you're making the right financial decisions for your retirement. Let's talk now about how can we protect what we have from investment scams, because the reality is that older adults are typically the number one or number two target for frauds and scams, and investment frauds in particular, because they're older. Individuals think that they've accumulated more wealth, so they can be prime targets, and criminals don't care that you're a granddaughter, that you have, you know, 14 grandchildren, or that, you know, you're living on a really fixed and limited income. They're out to get every last penny. So it's important that we take into consideration these next three types of fraud. investment fraud. So first I want to talk about affinity fraud because, we talked about, being able to trust our neighbors, to lend them small things. Um, but we need to understand that many criminals, many scam artists rely on affinity fraud to convince unsuspecting individuals to donate, um, to invest their hard-earned money into whatever pitch it is that they're offering. Now, affinity fraud happens when someone comes into an organization and develops these really quick relationships, and it's built all on trust. And they're pretty common within church organizations, civic clubs, Rotary clubs, athletic golfers associations, baseball leagues, those types of things where, you have a lot of things in common. And so you've got someone who comes in and they spend some time, they're good. They'll spend a year or two, creating these relationships, all the while their ultimate goal is to convince you to invest in some, far out investment opportunity. And the problem is we've built this trust with them. And so suddenly here's this great opportunity. And I know that, what I have is going to be a challenge to make it last. So if I have this great opportunity, it's easy to fall into that trap where we give all of our money to somebody who, promises these great returns. So it's important that we keep that in mind and don't assume that just because somebody comes into an area and has great opportunities that they're scam artists. But go back to BrokerCheck and make sure that they're licensed to offer the types of investments that they're trying to convince you to do. Um, or you can even check and make sure that the investment itself is registered, because you can't just offer an investment to the public without registering it through the proper regulators. And again, the proper regulators are the state securities regulators. So that would come under the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities. So the next type of investment scams that I want to talk about are the free lunch invitations or the free lunch and dinner invitations and offers. So they come in there, there are these beautiful, these are ugly, but they're these beautiful invitations. And you've got this free admission to this great lunch. You've got, maybe it's surf and turf they're offering. But there's always small print. And that's what you have to know and understand, because the reality is that nothing in this world is really free, right? We have to remember that. So some things that we want to take a look at and some red flags for free lunch or free dinners, are that they come on these bright and glossy invitations. Sometimes they even put them as color ads in local newspapers, because they don't have, they're willing to spend as much money as they need to, because the amount of money that they can scam and steal from unsuspecting investors is infinitely more than they'll spend on your $50 a meal, dinner. So they'll also tell you that they're going to be giving you free advice, and it's going to guarantee you a higher rate of return. Now, first of all, you need to understand that a return on investment can never be guaranteed. An investment is just that. It's an investment. There's always a risk that an investment isn't going to do as well as it's anticipated, especially if you look at, typically the market performs at, 6 to 8%. If someone's telling you that you're guaranteed a 25% return on your investment, or a 50% return. I've heard people even say that you're guaranteed 100% return on your investment. That is simply not true. It's important that you keep that in mind when you go and listen to these types of sales pitches. Sometimes they'll advertise that it's strictly educational, that you're not going to be you're not going to be pushed into buying anything. It is strictly educational, no sales. But the reality is they may just give you the information, but what they don't tell you is that by the time you get home from that dinner and you're full in your tummy and you're ready to go to bed or ready to watch that movie, they start with follow-up calls and they want to schedule an appointment so they can talk just with you. That's when the sales pitches get hard. So they give you this expensive meal. They tell you that there's no risk. You can't lose money. I'm always amazed when somebody says, this investment absolutely can't lose. Oh, wow. The reality is when you're investing, nothing is risk-free. Even bonds that, everybody assumes are completely safe. The reality is sometimes the municipalities or the governments who issue those bonds can't make good on them, or sometimes they go bankrupt. And guess what? Even though you hold a bond, if they don't have the money, they can't pay you. So that's something that's really important that we keep in mind. So let's talk then about, whoops, I got to get back to the right screen. Let's talk then about Ponzi schemes. So it's been asked if we are going to mention any specific names, and the only names that we'll be mentioning are such much older and well-known Ponzi pyramid schemers. So Ponzi schemes were named after Charles Ponzi from the 1920s, who created the first Ponzi scheme. And, if you think about it, if you're early on in the investment program, that's a pretty sweet deal, right? There's no actual business. And money is paid to the original investors from funds that come from new investors. But at the end of the day, only the very top is going to make any money. And the money they're making is money that's basically being stolen from newer investors. So Ponzi schemes promise these great returns that are much higher than any other opportunities. And the reality is there's actually not even a little bit of actual investment. There is a movie with the Polka King on Netflix. If you search on Netflix, the Polka King was actually a well-known polka artist in the northeastern PA. And he stole millions of money from individuals who invested in his Ponzi scheme. That was basically, he was going to invest it in Polish artifacts. And at the end of the day, the movie is fantastic. It's hysterical. It's got Jack Black in it, but it really does help to show how all of these things kind of come together, how Affinity Fraud comes together with a Ponzi scheme, and you've got this great friend who's suddenly offering you this great investment. But let's talk about Bernie Madoff. He stole billions with a B from individuals. He was arrested in 2008. And what's really sad to me is that originally he had a legitimate investment business. He actually was licensed as an investment professional. He was a mortgage or an investment broker, but he got money hungry. he eventually pled guilty to 11 felonies, including money laundering, perjuring. He filed false documents with the Securities and Exchange Commission and committed outright fraud. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison. Clearly, he's not going to do that. He's not going to serve that many years because nobody lives that long, and he's old already. But I think it was really, I think it went a long way to show, he got absolutely no leniency. They didn't offer him a plea bargain at all. He got what he deserved. Now, if you do any research into Bernie Madoff, he actually almost brags in interviews that that people were so gullible. He said that people would ask how he was guaranteeing these rates of return, and he simply decided not to answer them. And people continued to invest their hard-earned money into him. I just, if we ask those types of questions and we don't get an answer, it's really important that we question that. And individuals could have verified the offerings that Bernie offered if they would have checked with their regulator. So it's important, even if it's somebody we've had a long time relationship with, it's important that we verify not only the professional, but the thing that they're offering, because that thing, that investment that they're offering likely has to be registered with the state, or it's exempt and the state has to know that it's exempt. So I would encourage anyone to make sure that you're researching and verifying any investment opportunity. Okay, enough of that. So we do want to protect ourselves. Before we invest in anything, with the hard-earned money that you have, investigate the information. Before you trust someone with your assets, make sure that you can trust them by investigating their license. And before you invest, make sure that you research the product. Making sure that you use trustworthy resources, like my office, the Department of Banking and Securities, the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office, FINRA, and I'm going to actually provide you with all of those websites now. So I always first like to provide with Pennsylvania resources. The Department of Banking and Securities has a really robust list of free publications at dobs.pa.gov. Or you can call us at 800 PA Banks. We do have 4 individuals on staff that answer that phone when someone calls. So when you call 800 PA Banks, a real life person is going to answer your call. There's not going to be 14 buttons that you have to push before you actually get to speak to a human. If all 4 staff are on the phone at the same time, there is a voicemail that asks you to leave a message, and our staff will call you back, typically within 24 business hours. The Pennsylvania Attorney General also has publications available at attorneygeneral.gov. If you become a victim of an investment fraud, it's critical that you report it to my office, the Department of Banking and Securities. If you become a victim of another type of fraud or scam, the Attorney General is where you want to take that information. Now let's talk about some other resources. You can check BrokerCheck. Remember, you can check to make sure that your professional is properly registered at brokercheck.finra.org, or you can call the 800 number that's listed there on the screen. There's also a website, wi65.org. There were some public TV stations that put together a phenomenal documentary for planning for retirement. And what's really great about it is you have the ability to watch on that web page. You can watch the whole event from start to finish, or they actually took it and broke it down into sections based upon where you are in your career. If you're just starting out, if you're in the middle of your career, how you can make the most of everything, and then planning for retirement and beyond. So they have some really great publications. And then if you go to investorprotection.org, they also have a plethora of publications that are available for consumers to download and print. Um, and so they have publications similar to the one on 65, but they also have some that are more specific to the type of investing that you want to do. So maybe there's actually a publication that is all about stocks. There's another one that's mutual funds and exchange traded funds. And then there's another one that's bonds and bond funds. And then there are, I don't know, 5 or 6 other ones that sort of are more detailed and specific to, think very specific topics that you want to make sure that you get. So I always encourage people, the more knowledge we have, the better we will do with investing and making those assets last. So I hope that you will check out some of those other publications and resources as well. So this brings us almost to the close of our session today. I will open the floor to questions, but I think that we're on Facebook Live. Have there been any questions on Facebook Live?
I'm going to go check on that right now.
Thank you.
And I do not see any questions.
Well, I'm going to go to the next slide. My contact information is here. If you see this recording later, you can reach me at katrboyer@pa.gov, or you can give me a call at 717-214-5565. I hope as you're viewing this that you found the information helpful, and that if you have questions, you'll feel free to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katrina. We have several more presentations scheduled with Katrina and her colleague George from the Department of Banking and Securities. So we'll have one program a month for the next several months, and hope that you'll be able to join us for those.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to chat with you today, and I'll look forward to some of those other sessions.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.